So we continue with it. The kingdoms were made into 4 dynasties. Four different people came to rule at this point in time. 4 different dynasties, kingdoms came to rule in this particular kingdom of Israel. That is the 12 tribes. So let's quickly, okay, let me finish with the intro, then we look at the various dynasties that rule. Now, as I said, the history is that they continue had conflict with the Syrians and then the Judah. Later, it was invaded by Ahazia. Initially, it was made not to return back, but it was invaded the Assyrians. Note that the northern kingdom was taken over by Assyria. The southern kingdom was taken over by Babylonians. So let's look at it. As I said, Samaria, Israel, Ephraim was sometimes used as their names, their other names. So let's get to know that that's one of the reasons why the people of the New Testament did not really regard the people of Samaria as true Jewish people, because they mixed up with foreigners worshiping the Assyrians. The Assyrians didn't leave them. That is a true fact. They continued to stay with them. The foreigners came to invade, resettled among them in the northern kingdom. So those 10 tribes, the Assyrians, instead of taking them into what we'll call into slavery, no, they decided to come and stay with them. So they were staying with them there. They invaded and stayed, resettled among them. Therefore, you don't get a true Jewish blood because they remarried. And then that is why the New Testament era, we see that the Jewish in the South always see the people from Samaria as they are not true Jewish people. So that's the background to that issue there. So let's look at the various dynasties that took place. Let me start with here, the dynasty of Jeroboam. We get to know Jeroboam was their first king. Now, the dynasty of Jeroboam continued where the prophet, let me even mention those who rule after him first. Jeroboam, after the split of the kingdom, took over the northern kingdom. And then, being a very good administrator, he decided to make sure that the whole place is well organized. The whole northern kingdom is organized. However, he was afraid that when the people traveled to Jerusalem to worship in the temple, the people might go back to Jerusalem to join the other tribe. Therefore, in his own capacity, built up temples. And these temples were temples that worship idols so that they will not go to Jerusalem. He built temples at Dan and Bethel so that the people will not go back to Jerusalem to worship God. He was warned by 2 prophets. Now, let's try to look at it. 1 Kings chapter 13. Now, there we get to know an unknown prophet who was from Judah, from the southern kingdom. Now, this prophet came to warn Jeroboam that if he does not stop worshiping idols and do not break loose from all those, and the Lord will punish him. And the Lord was going to strike against all those that he had put up there. Unfortunately for us, Jeroboam decided to attack the prophet. And as he stretched his hand on the prophet, his hand got stuck in the air. That is how mighty the Lord is. And then the prophet showed the power of God. We also see that at the point in time, Jeroboam's wife inquired from the prophet Ahijah regarding the prospect of the recovery of their son, Abijah, who was sick at the point. But the fact the prophet gave it to them to let them understand that because of their failure to do what they needed, their son and even Jeroboam would die, and his son Nadab would take over. So there was all those things that happened, and we can see that Jeroboam left the scene for his son Nadab. Now, after Nadab came Baasha. Now, he also set up his own rule because Baasha was not from the tribe of Jeroboam. He was a captain for Jeroboam. He came from the tribe of the Issachar, and then he became the next king. He made the kingdom what we say when I mentioned that there was a point where Tirzah was their capital. It was Baasha who took them, who made the capital Tirzah. So the Jeroboam dynasty ended there with his son Nadab, and then Baasha took over. Now he was from a different tribe altogether, on a tribe of Issachar. Now this table gives us whilst the various kings, whilst Jeroboam was ruling here, Rehoboam was also ruling in the southern kingdom. Now, and then Abijah, the son of Rehoboam, was also ruling. Baasha overthrown Nadab, and then at that time, it was also Asa was ruling here. We get to know that his son, Baasha's son, took over Allah, took over from him as the next king. Now, it was during the reign of Baasha that we get the prophet Jehu, who was the son of Hanani, and proclaiming the words of the Lord and the message against Baasha. So he reminded the king that he should serve God, who had entrusted him to be the king. Unfortunately, Baasha continued in the self-adulterous way of Jeroboam. So they all followed the ways of Jeroboam, who was an adulterous man. Allah, the son of Baasha, took over from his father. Now, he ruled less than 2 years. Probably we say about 2 years, but he ruled less than 2 years. He ruled less than 2 years. So Allah ruled for about just 2 years. Here we see. And then, whilst he was drunk, Allah was assassinated by Zimra. So Zimra took over his life, and that he also now became the next king. But he's taken over the life of Allah was a prophetic words of Jehu. Jehu had prophesied about it already, and he was a friend to Allah, and then he took over from and a relative to Allah too. So we add them together as one, and he ruled for 7 days. He ruled for just 7 days. Zimra ruled for 7 days, just 7 days. We get to know the next person who took over from Zimra, and has to be Omri. Now, this is the next dynasty that we are going to talk about, Omri's dynasty. Now, he also did what? Omri also assassinated Zimra. 7 days that he was made king, he made sure that he killed him and then became the next king. Now, Zimri, for instance, was also another king who did evil in the sight of God by following the footsteps of Jeroboam. He ruled for 12 years, and then we get to know that he built the city of Samaria during his rule, And then strategically, he made sure that there was a road leading from Galilee through to Samaria. He made sure that all those things were established to make trade easier. Because of that, he promoted international trade and made sure that the place was well sealed for him. Now, it was he who made his son Ahab to marry Jezebel, who was the daughter of Etbah, who was from Sidon. So he made sure that his son Ahab married Jezebel. And this was the thing that really even made Israel go bad more, because economically they were doing very well, but religiously they were not good at all. So in the dynasty of Omri, Ahab and Jezebel also took over after the death of Omri. His son Ahab took over. Now, we all know the thing about Ahab. We know how Ahab ruled for 21 years, and then we know how Ahab did evil in the sight of God. There was the Baal worship that was promoted under Ahab and his wife Jezebel. We get one of the remarkable things about the prophet Elijah during the period of Ahab, where he had to challenge them for the worshiping of Baal. Ahab is seen as one of the kings who really did evil, much more evil, all because of his wife Jezebel. Ahab's son Ahazia took over from him as the next king. His son ruled only 1 year. Ahab's son ruled for only 1 year. And then let's say 1.5. So basically, some say 2 years, but 1 year practically. Now, he was unsuccessful because of most of the things that he did following the footsteps of his father, and also to go into battle. It was during that period that this man, Ahab, Ahazia, also left the kingdom for his son, who was also called Jehoram, to take over from him after his death. Jehoram also ruled for 12 years, and then his reign was terminated. So the dynasty of Jehoram was terminated by Baasha. The dynasty, so if you look at it, Jehoram, the son came to rule. Baasha came to take over with a coup, terminating that dynasty. Then Baasha also came to rule. At a point in time, he was also overtaken by Omri. Then his dynasty, his son was assassinated. Omri came to rule, and then at this point, his son was also going to be terminated by Jehu, the dynasty of Jehu, another kingdom altogether started. So Jehu also overthrown Jehoram. Now, this is the account of most of the things that happened during that time, because he also did his best to take over from them. Now, it's important for us to know that it was Jehu who sat on the throne for more years. In fact, he ruled, we will say that he was the longest king in the northern kingdom, because he ruled at a point before his the rest came, he had ruled for 28 years. It was just after him when Jehoahaz came, and then Jehoahaz came. Then we had another Jeroboam who came and ruled for 41 years. So until this period, it was Jehu who was leading as the highest ruler, because Baasha ruled for only 24 years, but he ruled for 28, and then Jeroboam the second ruled for 41 years. So it continues like that, overthrown. When Jehu came on, his son Jehoahaz took over from him. His grandson Jehoahaz also took over from Jehoahaz. Then their son Jeroboam took over from them. So there was a sort of continuation that was going on. They had people succession that were taken. So his dynasty was the longest. And then we have Jeroboam taking over from him. And then if you look at it, we try to add the number of years they reigned. Jehu, 28 years, plus 17, plus 16, plus 41. And then we have Zekiah here, 6 months. And then we have, so if you add all this, it gives you the longest of the dynasty. They had the longest of the dynasty. Then Salom overthrown Zekiah. Then Menahem took over. Pekahiah took over the son, and then Pekah also overthrown them. Hosea overthrown Pekah, and then they went into exile under the Ahazia. We get to know that it was Jehu who was a good king. Out of the 19 kings that came, he was the only two king, the good king in the northern kingdom. Whereas these people had about 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Whereas the southern kingdom had 8 good kings, they only had 1 king who was good, leading them to God. It's important for us to know that the southern kingdom went into exile to the Babylons under Nebuchadnezzar. Okay. And then the northern kingdom were in exile to the Assyrians under Sargon II. And that is how the kingdoms all ended. So the various quotations to back each of the stories that I've tried to summarize, in difficultly trying my best to put them together, is what we have here. Jeroboam the first, we can get where to read from him. Same ending up to Hosea. Then Rehoboam to Zedekiah, we can get all the quotations to read over from them. And this is how the kingdom had all went through for both the northern and the southern kingdom. This is just a way of trying to put the graph to let us see the long reign of each of them. So if you come to the southern kingdom, the longest reign was 55 years. But on the other side, the longest reign has to be was brought back to just a reign of only 41 years. So we have 41 years reign and against 55 years. In fact, when it comes to the southern kingdom, 41 was their third highest, but the northern kingdom, it was the highest reign. Okay. Any question up to this point? Yes, I know you can see I'm trying to put them together because there are many. We have to try to touch on everyone and try to summarize it in a nice way for us. Okay, so let's look at it. So in the Northern
So,
Kingdom.
Papa, so far, so good.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
we are
Thank you.
we are following.
Okay, thank you, Papa Bright. It's not, I know it's quite confusing, but I'm trying my best. So it's good you have given me the assurance. So when it comes to the kingdom of Israel, which is the northern kingdom, started with Jeroboam, moved to Nadab, Baasa came in, Allah, Zimra, Omri, Ahab, ruling with the wife Jezebel. And that is where we have more of the story about Elijah. Then he moved on to Ahazia. Ahazia was her son, and then he died. So Jehoram, who was also another son of Ahab, took over. We get to know that from there, Jehu took over, Ahazia, Joash, Jeroboam II, Zechariah took over, Salom, Menahem, Penikah, then move on to Pekah, then Hosea. So this is just a way to let you see the various reign of the kings that came in. For the southern kingdom, we get to know Saul. He was part of the divided the United Kingdom. So we will move from Solomon. This is just to give us an idea. So Solomon here, giving it to Rehoboam. So we start from Rehoboam. That is why Jeroboam and Rehoboam are all on the same line. But this one's ruled proud to this because this one's ruled in the United Kingdom. But this is where the divided kingdom all started from. So we have Jeroboam, who ruled, Abijah taking over, Asa, Jehoshaphat taking over, Jehoram here. And then I told you that he died, and therefore his mother, Athaliah, took over. Athaliah was from the tribe of Ahab. So we get to know that it was from this family Athaliah came. In fact, a daughter of Ahab. So we get him here. We get her here, who was married by Jehoram. So they also move from there. It goes to Ahazia, Jehoshaphat, Amaziah, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Ammon, Josiah. So it just moved straight till we ended there, Hezekiah. So that is another graph to give us. When you have this graph, it gives you even straight away from Saul till the kingdom was divided during the reign of Jeroboam and Rehoboam. So then what happened next follows. So this is another simple genealogy of kings of Asia, ancient Israel and Judah. But we started with the United Kingdom and then coming down to the divided kingdoms. So we move on to another difficult and another serious area, which has to do with the prophets in Israel during the time. Now, prophets were the spokespersons who represented God before mankind. So they were covenant enforcement mediators. They have to make sure that we do what God wants us to do. The true prophet gave prophecies that were later fulfilled. According to Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 20 to 22, if a prophet gives a prophecy and it's not fulfilled, then the person becomes what? A false prophet. So the distinguish between a true prophet and a false prophet, according to Deuteronomy, has to be with the fulfillment of the prophecy. They were known for their moral character, and then they hated sin, according to Micah chapter 3, verse 8. If you're a prophet during the time, you have to hate sin, and you have to be of high moral standard. Now, they were inspired to give messages with the presence of the Holy Spirit. Now, a prophet is a prophet, a spokesperson representing God, giving messages to mankind from God. But a seer refers to those who have insight into God's will. So a seer will tell you exactly what the meaning of what you are going through. So let's take that I'm doing business. Things are not moving on well. And then I want to understand why things are not moving on well. I go to see the person I go to see. Now Ghana, we call the person still a prophet, but the interpretation to what is happening to me is given to the office of a seer during those days. So it's a seer who is able to give me an interpretation to what is happening. That was why when Saul lost the sheep and searched everywhere could not find, they said they have to go and see a seer who will give them an insight to what is happening to them. So in other words, seers were people we go to do because yeko ye ebisa yeko kubisemu ye eti asiye. I don't know whether today we've been able to understand the prophet, the office of a prophet and a seer. That's the two different things. The prophet is an intermediary or someone who represents God's space of God's mind to mankind, the will of God. But they make sure that what God is saying is this. They are of high moral standard and hate sin. So a prophet cannot tell me that it's also only obituary that and obi obo ejamayan san we. No, those things are not of God because God is high moral standard. Then number two, a seer give insight into the happenings of God. So let's understand what is all about this prophet. Now, there were 18 prophets that lived during this period. And it was usually during the divided kingdom that we have all these 18 prophets. Some of them have books attributed to them. And some of them, their prophecies are also found in the other books. Example, Elijah prophesied to the people of Israel, which is the northern kingdom. And during his prophecy, Ahab, Ahazia, and Joram were then the king. Ahab was king. He died. Ahazia came to take, and then he died. Then Joram came to lead. So these were the kings during their reign that Elijah prophesied. We shall look at some of the few things about their prophecies as well that will help us know much about what they did. Elisha also came into the picture during that period, also to prophesy. So we also have Elisha, who took over from Elijah, prophesying. Now, let's take someone like Elijah and go over him some more, something small about the prophet Elijah. We got to know that Elijah stepped forth in the era where there was so much apostasy. He's known for the 3.5 years drought, or where there was no water, which was not raining during the time. He's also known for the challenge of the bar, where we get to know how he asked that there be a competition between him and the bar, the prophet, the priest of Bar, whose God will let fire fall down to burn the altar. That has been said. So those things came in. We can also talk about him being the one who ran away from Jezebel when Jezebel had wanted to execute him, after he made sure that all the statues of Baal were destroyed. And he had to run away. We all know that. I tell people that fear women, it didn't start now. Even the prophet who could break down gauze, tirabosom, obubu abosom, obaso obe nbibi ano di America. Na wa udi benkuni nkruma nkwanya no akoda. Na wo yesi suroma na twi hu firi ho na ministry na nkose ya wo se onte ase. So that was Elijah. We get to know about Elijah too. When he received, I think it was Elijah who also had an encounter with Ahab. Yes, had an encounter with Ahab concerning Naboth's vineyard. Naboth, 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 1 to 20. I think verse 1 downwards. Yes, we get to know about the Naboth issue, and then how Jezebel did all she can to take over that possession, that property. So Elijah was there. Elisha is also another prophet who took over from his boss Elijah. We get to know that Elisha was a servant, or let's say that second in command to Elijah. He also prophesied to the people of Israel, and then he prophesied during the reign of Joram, Jehu, and Jehoahaz, the king. And that is Elisha too for us. Now, sometimes the two prophets seems to be in cooperation, because we get to know that the two prophets had cooperated to establish a school for the prophet throughout Israel. There was that establishment there. Now, when Elijah left, he gave his double portion of mantle to Elisha. Elisha's ministry was known not only throughout Israel, but also in Syria, as well as Judah and Edom. So Elisha seems to have done more than what Elijah did, because he was carrying double portion of anointing. We get to know about Elisha through the healing of Naaman. And I remember, the Naaman, who was an army officer and then was advised by the slave girl to go to see the prophet for his healing. And so Naaman was seen out there. We also see Elisha, who was also a man of God, who had to change the water, the bitter water, to taste better for the people to drink. We get to know that the king, at a point in time, Jehu did his best to, consult him once in a while to seek his advice on things that were happening. So Elisha, much has to be said about him. We get to know that he was one prophet who could let a barren lady give birth, and then his also son, his servant, decided to incur the wrath of God when Naaman brought the gift, and then they refused. He bypassed them to take it. And that is how the whole thing also went through. We move on from Elisha to Isaiah. Isaiah was also another prophet who came up and is highly known for his prophecies that happened to the people of Judah who were in the southern kingdom. The people of Judah who were in the southern kingdom. Isaiah, as we know, prophesied in the period of King Uzziah, King Jotham, King Ahaz, King Hezekiah, and King Manasseh. That was the period that Isaiah prophesied. So sometimes in the objectives, some of these things come as to whose reign did this prophet prophesy. And please, you have to note it, and then you kill it for us. So Isaiah. It's important for us to mention that Isaiah was married and had at least 2 children. Isaiah chapter 7 verse 3 and Isaiah chapter 8 verse 3. I don't know why all the verse 3 of the chapter 7 and 8 talk about his children. At least we get one child from chapter 7 verse 3, and another child in chapter 8, verse 3. So Isaiah was married and had at least 2 children. Now he lived in Jerusalem, and from time to time, he spoke to the kings of Judah. Now he delivered prophecies of judgment and salvation about Judah as well as many other foreign nations. From Isaiah chapter 13 to chapter 27, we find all this. Now he is best known for his messianic prophecies about both a king and a sovereign servant. We get to know in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 53, where we talk about a king, a Messiah who will come, who will suffer, but he will be among his people as well. And that leads us to how Jesus Christ, we all understand it to be a prophecy from the Old Testament. Now, we get to know that Isaiah was one prophet who was also a good preacher. He was a prophet, but also a good preacher. In chapter 7 of Isaiah, we get to know that. How did he do that? He used figures of speech, interesting figures of speeches, to give most of his things. And those doing TTS, you'll be doing Isaiah, so we'll go deeper into some of the things that he used to do. How he used the kings, Judah's kings are called the rulers of Sodom in chapter 1, verse 10, where they will perish. He has a nice way of bringing God's message out, and that is Isaiah. We get to know about another prophet called Jeremiah. Jeremiah also prophesied to the people of Judah, or which we call the southern kingdom. He prophesied during the time of Manasseh the king, Ammon, Josiah, Joahaz, Joachim, Zedekiah. These were people that Jeremiah prophesied during their reign. It's important for us to know that Jeremiah was also regarded as one great prophet during his time. Now, Jeremiah was a prophet, and then we get, yes, okay. So we get to know that if the question comes, let me just say this, contemporary of Isaiah, that which prophet was a contemporary to Isaiah, you have to know that is what? Jeremiah is one, because they all prophesied during, at a point in time, the same era. Do we get it? That's another thing. And now those questions also come, where we have to talk about those who prophesied, who overlapped, their prophecies overlapped. So Jeremiah is one of the prophets at the time. Now, what about Jeremiah that we can talk about? Jeremiah was from a priestly family that lived in Anathoth, where he was born. Now, a city in the tribe of Benjamin. So that is where he lived, according to Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 1. Now, Jeremiah suffered great persecution at the hand of Judah's last 2 kings. So Judah's last 2 kings, that is why Jeremiah suffered much persecution. And his extended family also tried to kill him. When we read Jeremiah chapter 11, verse 18 to 23, we get to know that his extended family even tried to kill him. He also struggled with why God was making him go through such bitter experiences. We got to know that Jeremiah was at a point, even there was he was put into a pit. The king put him in a big well, and then lucky for him, there was no water, and he had to be pulled out. So at the point, he was bitter why God was doing all those things for him. He cried out in frustration with several laments. Through all this hardship, Jeremiah came to realize that nothing was too difficult for God to accomplish. And that is how Jeremiah. We talk about the prophet Jeremiah. The book